All right, well, good evening, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening.
You know, I'm not starting until you say good evening back, right? So welcome, everybody. I'm Dean Shannon Hader, the Dean here at the School of International Service. And this is an incredibly special evening for us, a very important memorial lecture. And we are thrilled to be back in person this year with our special guest to pull it off. The 6th annual Nancy Weiser Ignatius Lecture on the Environment. My special thanks to Mr. Paul Ignatius, his son David, daughter Sarah, and daughter-in-law, and family for joining us tonight. Really appreciate your continued commitment to SIS. This annual lecture features senior policymakers and leaders in the nonprofit, in the public, and in the private sectors who work tirelessly to address environmental challenges around the world. And tonight, I am thrilled to welcome our special guest, Ramón Cruz. Ramón became the first Puerto Rican, and I think the first Latino president of the Sierra Club recently, America's oldest and largest environmental organization, in May 2020. He has more than 20 years of experience working at the intersection of sustainability, environmental policy, urban planning, energy, and climate change. He's worked in the public sector in Puerto Rico as the Deputy Director of the Environmental Quality Board, the State Environmental Regulatory Agency, and as the Commissioner of the Puerto Rico Energy Commission. He's also been a consultant for World Bank, the Natural Resources Defense Council, the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute, and the German Agency for International Cooperation. And most importantly, he's an alumni of SIS. And those of you know that we take our mission here really seriously. SIS was founded in 1957 and given the charge by President Eisenhower about 10 years into the Cold War to wage peace under the concept that peace is not just the absence of war. It is the way we address the world by actions day to day to improve the condition of humanity. So it's so telling that the theme of this memorial lecture is the environment and the intersection of the environment with so many different aspects that are important in our day-to-day lives. Before we get our program, I want to really take a moment to honor the life and the legacy of the late Nancy Weiser Ignatius. I was just learning a little bit more from her family about Nancy, or Nan, I think as she was affectionately known. She earned her master's degree here in International Affairs at SIS in 1969. And was a dedicated member of the SIS alumni community until her passing in 2019. Throughout her life, Nan was determined to make a positive difference in the world. She was a pioneering activist who championed environmental causes long before they became mainstream practices. In the 1970s, was just hearing about how Nan co-founded Concern Incorporated, an all-female volunteer organization that informed and empowered consumers to make environmentally conscious shopping decisions. Through its advocacy, manufacturers felt the pressure of the pocketbook to adopt a more sustainable product packaging practices. I think I heard about pocket tips that they put together so that when you were shopping, you had your cheat sheet that says, you know, buy this for a better impact on the environment. Nan followed this success with her work at the Department of Energy, where she launched the first solar energy exhibit in 1976 on a section of the National Mall. Later, she worked for the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. In addition to her environmental advocacy, Nan was deeply involved with the Washington National Cathedral, where the Nancy and Paul Ignatius program was established to honor the couple's lifetime of service, as well as their personal commitment to exploring and addressing humanity's most challenging questions. Nan's life exemplified the ideals of service that are so central to our mission here at SIS. Her legacy clearly lives on with her family and the continued impact of her work in environmental activism. And although I know this memorial service is about her work, I bet you, not having met yet her, that she would want me to give a shout out to the mission of service of her entire family. Of her husband, Paul, who played many roles within the US government, particularly as Secretary of the Navy, Assistant Secretary of Defense, in the US Army as Undersecretary and Assistant Secretary of the Army, in business, in logistics, in service. her children, David, Addie, Sarah, and Amy, who amongst them, I think, span journalism, storytelling, novelism, judge, legal, nonprofit directorship. And I'm sure that is a compliment and an inspiration coming from Nan and her legacy. So thanks to the generosity of the Ignatius family, the annual Nancy Weiser Ignatius Lecture on the environment continues to engage our SIS community and our friends with thought-provoking conversations on core environmental challenges facing the world today. And now I'm going to hand it off to our MC first, actually, introducing Professor Simon Nicholson, who's going to open our evening's lecture and wax a little bit more poetic on tonight. Simon is an associate professor of international relations here at SIS and also the founding director of the Center for Environment, Community, and Equity. His research and teaching focuses on global environmental governance, on the intersection of technology and the environment, and on carbon removal and solar radiation management responses to climate change. Thank you, Simon, for your key role in bringing this special lecture to life each year. So please join me in welcoming our fabulous.
Thank you, Shannon. I will say nothing more than welcome. And in addition, just express my own gratitude to the Ignatius family for the ongoing support for this lecture series. It's fitting that we have an environmental visionary, a leader in the environmental movement here today, who's also an alum of the school, given Nan's support for this lecture series. So, Ramón, we'll bring you to the microphone.
Right. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Mr. Ignatius. It was great speaking before. You know, I must say he is 102.5 years old.
Wow.
Thanks so much for your service. And you know, his mind, I wish my mind right now would be as sharp as his. It was quite a, you know, quite a thing to meet you. So thanks so much. And, you know, it's great to be here. It's a great joy, you know, to meet in person again. I want to acknowledge that, you know, being back in person, you know, I have been in my position for 3 years. And so I started basically with COVID. And so, you know, we have not been able to do a lot of this. Everything was in Zoom land, you know, virtual. And so, so I'm very grateful, you know, that we're safe, that we are able to meet, because many have not, you know, and many are still not able to or are no longer with us. So I want to acknowledge and appreciate that. Want to also thank SIS for inviting me. You know, I think for me, this means, you know, I made it. You know, forget about being elected president of the Sierra Club. You know, this is, you know, I have photos right out here or in front of the library with my mother. You know, on graduation. You know, and when she came to visit, and being a single mother, it was a great sacrifice to have me attend a university like this one. And you know, if she was alive, you know, I would tell her that I made it. And, you know, having grown up without much, I was, she knew that I was quite the expert in, you know, looking for free food. So, you know, I'm very proud to that now I can be the reason of that other students can have free food after. So, thank you, including my niece that is in the audience here. Also thankful to the Ignatius family for making this lecture in honor of your mother, of your wife. You know, what a great way to be remembered, and a great legacy. So thank you very much for that. And like I told you, I wish in the elevator coming here, wish you were in the Navy still, because I was. As it was said in the deputy, in the state regulatory agency. So we were in charge of the cleanup of Vieques, something that I was very involved in and actually served jail for, protesting that the use of the bombing range, back 20 years ago. But yeah, so it's great to be here, to be back on campus. Some things are very different. Some things have not changed, but this building, it's we had the small building in front when I was here, and this is quite something, so way to go. Very good, LEED certified, very good, and so, and of course the world is completely different, now when I was here, for those of you, the students here, no cell phones, no laptops. Imagine your world like that, no? No PowerPoints, no, it was like the overhead transparent. You remember the overhead stuff? Library catalogs. So, very different world. But ultimately what makes this place special has not changed at all, which is the things that you learn and the relationships that you build while you're here. And so value and cherish that, because, that will last, a whole life, And, it's interesting. I was here, and I was as well as a history major. And when I was interviewed here, for this, I was asked, in terms of the AU and the involvement, and it was actually, I guess, the study of social activism and social movements that actually led me to pick, the environment as the cause. But I'm very glad to see how SIS is expanding, that vision of what you just said, Dina, in terms of expanding that definition of what peace means and how do you get there, no? I'm glad to see that there's more faculty that from other fields that are the non-traditional, say like anthropologists. Or I remember my last semester here was the first time that they brought Clarence Lucen back then for a course on race relations. And so that was for me, that was a big change from the more traditional courses. So, and of course I owe a lot to Louis Goodman, former dean that connected me to an environmental organization in Brazil. And that was my first career, step. But anyway, so it was through history that I got to this film festival, and there I met I remember talking to this former guerrilla from Uruguay, and I sometimes think of that as what really shifted my attention to environment, because she was very frustrated with her generation and how all the things that they fought for was co-opted by political egos and corruption. And when she told me, I remember that if she would be right now starting her career, she would look at the environment, partly because it's a leaderless or a protagonist-less movement. And when you think about that, maybe Greta Thunberg is the closest thing that we have had to an icon in 50 years of the modern environmental movement. And so I think that's very good, for a movement when depends much less on the people, then you're able to focus on the cause. And so that's, I wish I would know her name or, where she would be right now, because definitely I owe my career switch to that. And so, yeah, so again, like Greta might be the closest or the only icon that I know right now. And I'm sure she has inspired many students here. And I'm glad to also see that level of activism in the AU community that I thought back then it was much less. I sometimes think that sometimes I felt as many of my peers came more to the university to mature rather than to learn, and or to have an education. I remember not meeting anyone who the choice was whether to study or not to study, to eat or to pursue a career, in the same way that I have met, in developing countries or even in Puerto Rico, and so I want to say that because, that for me is partly the definition of privilege, and I'm not saying, I'm not bringing privilege to make you feel bad or guilty, but, to question yourself, what do you do with that privilege? As many of you will define your future careers, in life, things of giving back, and the importance of giving back. And I remember, there's many people that eventually, forget that, and they would you see it in politicians all the time, how the race to appear more working class or more coming from the bottom, and then they forget about all the same people that they claim to come from, and that is important because many people, especially those oppose giving back, or pay taxes or cutting workers' rights, as we have seen, often, say things like everyone has an opportunity and responsibilities, or claim to be self-made. And, I believe there's no such thing as being self-made or a self-made person. Even when you come from lower economic backgrounds, there was someone that helped you. There is someone that pushed you to get there, and an infrastructure that supported you. And so, it's important that you remember that, and remember that with your votes as well. Anyway, so it was here that I decided to become an environmentalist and develop a career in environmental policy and advocacy. And I was, able to use from here. I did policy school and urban planning as well, and have been able to use my degrees. But coming out of here, when I became an environmentalist, I thought I was going to be like a Jane Goodall in the jungle. And back then I had long hair, and I thought I'll do all the sexy stuff that you do as an environmentalist. And instead, I landed a job dealing with trash in New York City. And so, there's not I remember friends would like bully us, you're joking that I was dumped in a trash bin, or, in the sewer, working on sewers and all that, which I was, but anyway, at that time I used, I did a quantitative analysis of all the trash and all the damage caused by the trash in New York City, and it was actually, I remember, during the last season of Sex and the City, so we call it like Trash and the City, and it doesn't get, you cannot really like do sexy stuff with trash so much, but it was actually, it ended up being an amazing experience that launched my career, and the movement of trash in New York City actually defined, it became the environmental issue of the time. It defined the second Bloomberg election as mayor of the city, and also it was one of the biggest environmental justice issues. So out of that, I developed this career in the green organization and organizations, and these places, the big greens, as I would call them, or the elite hallways of institutions like this one and many others, were not always welcoming people like me, or people from my background. And even AU was at the forefront in accepting women and people of color, but still, you can imagine, that these organizations and this institution was not easy in terms of accepting people from all these backgrounds. So I wanted to acknowledge that as well, and to, ultimately, I stand in the shoulder of giants that were able to open these places for us. And, that leads me, of course, to ask, who would have thought that I would become the president of Sierra Club? That was extremely unlikely 130 years ago when we were founded by John Muir. And it really started as an exclusive hiking club, that was by invitation only. And John Muir, of course, was an amazing leader, and his writings on the sacredness of nature and the importance of appreciating it and having access to nature were transformational, and founded a movement, that accomplished many things, like the creation of national parks. But also, one has to acknowledge that before the great national parks, the lands belonged also to people that had been much better stewards than us or anybody that came after them. And the way and the methods that sometimes the U.S. government used caused great harms, especially to indigenous and Black population of the time. And of course, it's debatable, if John Muir himself was a racist or not, but or if he was just a product of the time. But certainly at the moment when the Sierra Club was formed, there was already an abolitionist movement for many years, for many decades, And but among our founding members, there were eugenicists and also people that had owned other people within their lifetime. And this was something that, especially in that summer of reckoning after, 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, something that I think all the legacy, these institutions that had been around for a while, entering that introspection of, an analysis of, where we had caused harm or how we're doing as an institution. And of course, all of this, when we exposed analysis like this, created a lot of controversy, especially among our base. And, without a doubt, John Muir founded an organization that became the rocket ship of the conservation movement, preserving places and landscapes and bringing up knowledge together with it. It morphed then into the modern environmental movement about 50 years ago, when the first Earth Day came in, and all the bedrock environmental laws were started back in the 70s, and those laws that over and over has passed a lot of tests and attacks along the way, especially from extractive industries, and allies in Congress, and from there the movement became also of course, synonym of great success, but also a lot of criticism, especially from the environmental justice organizations and more local fights that were not necessarily happy with our methods or the way that we would parachute into a place and try to call the shots. Ultimately was a very chauvinistic way of coming into these places. And so, that makes me think, of how we, as an organization and as a movement, what do we stand for? How do we become better allies? Or, how can we uplift, the issues, but also bring as many people as we can? And so, as head of the Sierra Club, it hasn't been easy. And, I have a commitment to continue that legacy. But, thinking of that analysis and that summer of reckoning that I mentioned before, and questioning our organization's journey in all this, many people were not in agreement. And there was a big pushback from within our base about it. I received, I don't know how many emails about, stay in your lane, and your lane being as the environmental lane. Don't get involved into all these social issues, because what we're about is about the conservation and environment. And, that time I wrote an op-ed in the San Francisco Chronicles, and there I said how I want to share the road of environmental advocacy, with as many people as possible. And so I wrote, and I want to share some of that with you. I wrote, I want, and here quote, I want you all to understand why it is important that the Sierra Club's lane in the environmental movement be broad enough to include people like me. I want to share my story. I come from a colonized place where people are often discriminated against and robbed of agency by the leaders charged with our fates. I'm Puerto Rican and I am Latino. I am American. Puerto Ricans are Americans, even if not by choice. I have 4 uncles that fought in the Korean War against their will. One of them died in battle. But many many families like mine were able to thrive in this country thanks to opportunity, education, and privilege. If not for what some people call reverse discrimination, I would not be president of the Sierra Club today. I am proudly and unapologetically the result of affirmative action programs. These were relatively short-lived efforts, lasting only a couple of decades, right? Meant to correct 4 centuries of denying women and people of color the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I would not have been able to attend an Ivy League school without affirmative action. Those programs do not exist today, and as a result, many students do not receive access to high-quality education. I'm also of mixed race. Before 1967, my parents would not have been able to get married in several states, as one was Black and the other white. The idea of that people of different races shouldn't marry may seem absurd now, but many people were complacent about it back then. Perhaps they thought they were staying in their lane. In the same time period, the Sierra Club's lane often excluded Black people like my father or grandfather as members, as it was an invitation-only organization with some people that formerly owned other people. And things are very different today, thanks in large part to people of color and white allies who fought to open the doors of these organizations to people like me. But it doesn't mean that there is no discrimination in the environmental movement. For many years, I was the darkest in the room, the one with a cute Spanish accent who speaks funny. Even though I can communicate in 4 languages, English is not my native tongue. Being conscious of that fact and how my race is perceived makes me always feel like I'm walking on eggshells, especially when entering the halls of places like American University or Princeton when I went after, or big green groups like the Sierra Club. I suspect that most women and people of color would understand what I mean, as there is not an inherited confidence that comes from not being questioned or not doubting yourself. And that is privilege. The opposite is the feeling that you always have to compensate for a shortcoming that is just perceived as an inferior or inherited condition. So that is why I cannot change lanes, because for me, there is no other lane. The only progressive lane I can be is one that recognizes and celebrates all my identities. I hope that Sierra Club supporters concerned about whether we focus on a narrow definition of environment can find a way to broaden our idea of the Sierra Club's lane and help build an organization and an environmental movement that is inclusive, that celebrates diversity, that fights climate change, as well as systemic racism, and centers equity and justice in everything we do. And so to start, I close quotes and to start finishing, I'm sure we need to have discussion as well. But this brings to the topic of intersectionality, and I think intersectionality, is key to understand the interdependence of all these topics. Understanding why is important to as environmentalists to also fight racism, and that racism is also killing the planet. and that supremacy and white supremacy is killing the planet, and the logic would go someone like this, like that we accept or we condone, like being, to frack, the hell out of a mountain and pollute a watershed, in name of progress or economic development. And so we're able to sacrifice those places, and we're okay with that. But when those places that we sacrifice have people, then those people become disposable, and you cannot imagine or conceive of disposable people unless there is an ideology behind it that supports that, and an ideology based on supremacy. And in the case of the US has been white supremacy. And so that's why it's important to address that, to be able to end that in order to fight the climate crisis that is the biggest threat that humanity has faced. And so that is why I think the Sierra Club, that lane needs to be expanded and to include, other, voting rights, working rights, reproductive rights, labor rights, housing rights. So all of that ultimately become also environmental rights, and so ultimately also, the same people that now we're fighting to keep their voting rights, the same people whose votes are being suppressed are also the same people that are most vulnerable to the climate crisis. And so that's why that intersectionality is important. It's very similar with economic issues. I don't think anybody would like to pollute their rivers just for the sake of that. How come all communities are able to pollute a river in West Virginia, or an African nation sacrifice their jungle for an extractive industry, and it's why would they do that? And ultimately it's because of their jobs, because of they need to eat, but also the subsistence that or how often these extractive industries leave them completely poor on that. So it is, it's not that they want to, they don't like the rivers, but they need this. And often, those lowest in society will do the dirty work, while the extractive industries and the fossil fuel industries, and the corrupted government officials, inefficient bureaucracies, and greed is not allowing them to do that. It's not paying livable wages to have a life where they do not have to sacrifice. So it is poverty, the social injustice that is killing the planet, and causing the climate crisis. And so the interdependence of these issues and working on all that is what, could give us a chance to succeed. We have to grow this movement, and we cannot let the guard off. Recently, it seems almost, for those of us that have been on this for a while, it seems like we made it, like the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act will finally, allow us to bring carrots, not only the sticks that we always bring, with all the, suing companies and suing the government. We finally have a mainstream attention. I remember before Hurricane Katrina, if you got one article on climate change once a week or once a month was big. And now you open a paper and it's everywhere. So there's a lot of attention, private investment, philanthropy, ESG everywhere, banking, and also with the IRA, it's amazing how it centers justice at the core of that. So it seems like we made it, and still you have East Palestine happening, You know, you have all the water crisis in Mississippi. And so the issue is ultimately we cannot forget everything that we have gained, you know, through the, you know, in the last century to get us here and to allow, you know, just think that market and the private sector will take care of itself, you know, so that is still not there, you know, so so it is important to be there. And also another danger, I think, with the environmental movement, at least in this country, is to become a synonym of the Democratic Party. And that is a big danger, you know, because we cannot be a one-party issue. You know, we have to be as environmentalists much more than that. And, you know, of course, I'm thankful to President Biden and how transformative has been his administration. The last couple of weeks, I wouldn't say that with, you know, allowing drilling in Alaska and the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, we're suing the government on that and his administration. But, you know, it is, you know, it's also why we need to build a movement that is bigger than one party, and that is it's the only way that we can meet this challenge. And so, for many of you who are part of the progressive movement, we have to get used to reach out to people that we may not always agree with on everything, or that are uncomfortable to talk to, but I am convinced that's the only way of doing it. You know, I just spent the last month and a half or so traveling to over 15 states with our new executive director, Ben Jealous, who used to head the NAACP, and he's now coming in as executive director of the Sierra Club. And he often in several conversations, he would quote how Dr. Martin Luther King would remind his lieutenants of something that I thought it was so important. But it's basically, if you are too comfortable in your coalition, then your coalition is too small. You know, think about that. No, if you're too comfortable in your coalition, then your coalition is too small. So, you know, I hope you remember that, because we need all of you and many more to win this fight. And I hope many of you, as you launch your careers and help expand this movement, and you know, a movement that is inclusive, that can be uncomfortable enough to win this fight against the climate crisis. So we need you all. Thank you.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you.
Is this your first time in the building? Am I right?
I came to visit another time, and I saw I took a.
Yeah, if you've got sharp eyes, your picture is just on the wall outside here.
Exactly, but yeah, that was the first time then.
Welcome back. I would say you had made it. I'll also say that we had Jane Goodall in the building a few years ago giving a talk.
I think
so. Yeah, if we can grow your hair a little longer, we can bring you back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know if that will happen.
I've got lots of questions for you. I'll ask just a couple, and then we'll turn to the audience for some questions as well, if that's okay.
Great.
I want to pick up on just a couple of the themes that you gave us. You know, so clearly, not just for the Sierra Club, but for the movement, this is a moment of introspection. I wonder if you can speak a little bit more about how that reckoning is going, what you're seeing inside the movement. Is the movement evolving in useful ways, or is it fragmenting or pulling itself apart as we move through this moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm of course I'm an optimist. Otherwise, I would have chosen the wrong career. And I do think the movement is expanding. I think, you know, maybe in the past, Sierra Club would have been one of the few organizations and the largest. But right now, the reality is there's so many organizations that are around, that it's a sign that the movement is growing. Of course, it's important, and it's becoming much more diverse, much more inclusive, and also very aware of its size and creating better ways of interacting. Something that was transformative for the Sierra Club was when we adopted the HEMES principles for democratic organizing as a methodology to interact, and with and getting involved in issues. And that was big because sometimes, again, like smaller communities would resent us coming in and then all of a sudden start saying what, calling the shots. And so that was, it's a set of principles developed by environmental justice organizations that is based on mutuality of commitment to transformation, of sharing resources, being invited to come in rather than entering there, and that made a big difference. So I think that has contributed a lot to growing the movement and better understanding of the issues and the challenges that we face.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we've seen as the movement has grown, of course, is a mainstreaming of sustainability and environmental protection as notions. But you mentioned big business and so forth adopting the mantle of sustainability. And you also told us that environmental justice as a concept is being centered in the Sierra Club's work, but also in the Inflation Reduction Act, right? So we're seeing a mainstreaming of this sometimes controversial, long-standing notion of environmental justice. I just want to ask: is there any danger that something gets lost in that mainstreaming? What is happening with environmental justice right now?
Yeah, no, definitely there is a danger. I think, I guess whenever things go mainstream, they go more popular. Therefore, it's good on one side, and then on the other, it becomes, thinner in terms of less attention, superficial, I would say, and then the advantage of those people that have always wanted to take advantage or make a profit. No, however, it's good when you see that philanthropy, that government, not necessarily knowing exactly how to implement the Justice 40 initiative that the Biden administration have worked at. But the fact that it's happening is a huge change. It's transformational. To have people that understand these issues being inside the administration and shaping these debates. And, of course, it's not perfect, but, those growing pains are necessary to build a better society. That it's a journey. It's not a destination. And so that's very important. But no doubt that it has become much better and part of the general knowledge. So, yeah.
I'll ask just one more question, and then is the idea that folks will line up at the microphone if they want to ask questions. So I'll invite that in a moment. So we've heard you talk about lanes, and we've heard you talk about coalitions. I should say that the vision for this lecture series has been that we need to hear about environmentalism from lots of different angles. And so we've had Kathleen McLaughlin, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Walmart. We've had Senator Whitehouse come and speak as part of the series, and Ernest Moniz, just after he left the administration as Energy Secretary. Is there room in the lane for big business? Is there room in the lane for government? How do you think about the nature of the coalition and your work with these other actors?
Well, no doubt, without, especially, when I said that you need to be uncomfortable enough, it's part of that. It's interesting. I was meeting about 2 weeks ago with the president of the COP28 in Dubai, which is the big climate conference that happens every year and tries to advance the international community and the Paris Agreement. And so there's a lot of doubts about that presidency. because it's an oil-rich and gas-rich country, and they put that president as president to shepherd this process, someone that is the head of a formerly a head of an oil company, and so when we were meeting, of course he wants to appear that he's better than he has been to the environmental community, but something that I was trying to argue with him, it was similar to in the past, and maybe Paul remembers that only Nixon goes to China, meaning it only takes like these staunch anti-communists to start relationships with the Chinese government back then, and we see what happens now and the role of China in the world, how it has completely changed based on that visit. And so basically we were trying to, or I was trying to convince him that actually, I have been in meetings with the extractive industry, CEOs, et cetera, and some are trying, but the reality is they're not doing much. But they also know what my positions would be. So I hope that having someone like him talking to them would be also transformative. And we'll see. But of course, that's where, we need them in, but we also cannot let the sticks and the regulations to go lax, because if not, then we see what happens with how things get derailed, and then all communities suffer after that.
Thank you, Ramón. So let me invite people to the microphone, or raise your hand if you'd like a microphone brought to you. I'm very happy to take questions, please.
Hi, is this on? Yes. Awesome. I'm here with my class, actually, environmental justice class, and thank you so much for sharing your journey. It's really touched on so much. And what I'm curious about is, how do you propose we encourage people and organizations to get out of the mentality of staying in your lane? How can we broaden our own ideas to engender intersectionality? And how do we grow?
Thank you. I was hoping you would tell. No, I think, and I'll just, talk randomly, not in orders of importance, but we often are in many silos, and there's not that much interaction. And that's partly why I said the coalition, creating the coalition building is so important. Like in the Sierra Club, for example, we have the Sierra Student Coalition, and we do training, with young people, and many of our base are, people in the retired age. And, that's usually where we get most of our work, and also the people that have more time to be involved in these issues that are so relevant. So, we really need to be thinking much more in an intergenerational way, to capture that passion, from the young people, but also that experience and of retired people. And so, I don't think we're doing enough in that, reaching out to different constituencies, and again, creating these uncomfortable coalitions that could get us there. So that is one way of doing it. The other way would be the importance of all of you, because you understand, and you understand the world in a much different way, and can communicate and reach to others in ways that I cannot even imagine. So again, it's that, learning from everybody has something to contribute. And I'm not just saying it in the, kumbaya and, let's have everybody, grab, take each other's hands, but it's more on the learning how to, ways of doing things that, especially with technology, things are changing so fast that it's needed, and the way we can monitor, things, the way that knowledge and data is shared, it's amazing. And at the same time, with all these advancements, a big challenge is how do people get access to that information if we're now, with social media and media have become, there's part of the population that have no access to all this information. And so that is something that it's disheartening, that I don't really have the answer, and that I hope that others will, because ultimately it's I think it's the people and the old school organizing that can get us there, because ultimately, how can I reach out if my social media and all the algorithms are not letting me see through the eyes of other people? So ultimately, is how to reach out and how to overcome, the big walls that Fox News, in my views, have put up.
Thanks. Here, John Muir probably didn't think too much about algorithms.
What?
John Muir probably didn't have to think too much about algorithms, right?
Hi, thank you so much for your time today. My name is Ariana. I am a New Yorker. My grandfather spent his entire career in the New York Sanitation Department, so I'm really psyched to hear about your trash experience. But I also spent time with the Sierra Club in New York City, and I was one of the 4 or 5 members on the Sustainable Finance Committee in New York City. And, I don't mean to be macabre or to disrespect this person, but it wasn't until the elder member of this committee dropped off that we actually were able to do any of the plans that we had planned to achieve. And even when we did formulate those plans, there was a litany of bureaucratic procedures that we had to go through to actually, have an event, to put out a message, to gain access to the Twitter account. And so I really think that you have a really bad infrastructural problem within the organization and the volunteerism that happens. And you can work so much to open that up, open those opportunities up. And you're right, the people that are there, they are mostly retirees, and they're mostly white, because those are the people that have the resources to be in that space and to show up with their time. However, maintaining that old guard is inhibiting so much action. It is inhibiting so much progress and inhibiting so much inclusion in the space. And so I really think that you can think more thoroughly about how to open it up to younger people, how to include them, and to actually have their participation be meaningful. So you should hire me to do that.
Right. Back to New York City.
I didn't expect the job ask on the back end.
I know.
Well, very neatly done.
Do you have your resume with you? No, I mean, thanks for what you just shared. I would say that it's important that that's the importance of inclusive, having policies that lead us to share that stage, with not only as an outside with outside groups, but also inside the organization. And so I'm very conscious about it. I actually do know about that issue. I don't know if you know, but there's a new chair of the New York City group as of a month ago or so, and doing his PhD. And so that can tell you a little bit about the age group. I don't want to be dismissive, like you said. We need everybody there. It's just we need to establish processes and institutionalized ways of being ensuring that there's sharing of responsibilities and leadership. And so definitely, we have 64 chapters, over 180 groups all over the country. I would say that most of our problems within those groups have to do with what you just said. It's ultimately people that wants to control things, or big egos. And so that's important what I mentioned before about being a protagonist-less movement, because ultimately none of us are indispensable. And so the more we share the stage and leadership, the better it is for the movement. So yeah, I do hope that things start changing, not only in New York City, but you know, everywhere. And that's not the only place that have the same problem that you just mentioned.
Thank you. We're coming close to the end of our allotted time, but do you have it in you to take another couple of questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, not a problem at all.
Hello, thank you so much for coming. My name's Cody. I'm one of the master students in the Global Environmental Politics program. And I wanted to ask a question. It was really interesting that you brought up COP28. So I wanted to touch on that just a little bit more deeply. And I wondered what Sierra Club's perception is of the ability of governments globally to directly divest from fossil fuels without fundamentally reforming all of the permitting and all of the processes associated with accelerating clean energy transition, so that we can actually save our planet and bend that curve down. So what is Sierra Club's position on that?
Well, in that regard, you know, we're involved in the process. We're part of a bigger ecosystems of groups that are trying to influence that. We're mostly a U.S. organization, and our international involvement is usually through processes like the Paris Agreement to and more to look at what the U.S. as a watchdog of what the U.S. participation is. So the ability, you know, in a place, I mean, I'm biased because I'm a big proponent and also supporter of multilateralism and the United Nations, even though it moves so slow. But you know, when you have something like the Paris Agreement, it's even though it's something that we would like the world to be shaped after, you know, it was an exception. It was a miracle that something like that happened, because imagine, you know, we cannot in this country with two factions that cannot understand each other, and or even you within your families, etc., to come to a decision. Imagine what it is for almost 200 members, often with very with directly opposite not only views but interests, you know, to do that. And that system is it's all, you know, unfortunately based on consensus, but that's the only way that could move forward. And consensus, even though sounds like a good you know, a good concept, it's actually pretty bad, because, you know, it's ultimately the least common denominator, and least common denominator means that everybody's pissed off at that. You know, nobody got what they wanted, but it is the only way that we can move forward, is finding those common denominators. And so there, the importance of leadership is key. And for the U.S. as one of the leaders of the world, it's extremely dangerous to you know, when you have people like Donald Trump accessing power, because you know, I would say, having, you know, and I have participated for the last 12 years in those processes, you know, and see how the influence of the U.S. has been eroded because of that kind of attitude, you know, because of pulling away from and giving the the back to those processes, it's not only bad for leadership and influence, but also bad economic, doesn't make an economic sense. So, it's a mix of, to go back, I guess, to your question, how do you do it? It's ultimately working. It's a very complex and difficult work of day-to-day gaining trust from the community of nations, and then exercising that leadership. And then you have, of course, all the incentives, being able to, I think what Janet Yellen is doing in Treasury is great, to be sure that, to lift up, taxes, et cetera, so that they don't go to the same sacrifice countries that these extractive industries are going, and that there is people watching out. So, we could go, of course, on a whole semester of a class on this, but.
Thank you.
Thanks. Time for one final question. Yes, thank you.
I have time. I wonder how hungry people are.
Thank you so much for your time and thoughtfulness. I'm JP. It's nice also not being the only Latino environmentalist in the room. That's pretty cool too. I guess I just had a question about, it's the sort of trajectory of the IRA has been very interesting over the past 10 to 20 years. Movements from those who want to keep it in the ground, right? The more sticks that you talk about, to the idea of carrots with the Green New Deal, climate, jobs, and justice, have really sort of created the political conditions and the ability for the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, to become real. And I think one thing that's really interesting about the moment is that now movements are sort of asking what comes next. On one ground, I think a lot of people are thinking of what it seeks to use the organizing grounds provided by the IRA so that people can start feeling their first taste of climate policy with what was won. And on the other ground, we also know that a lot wasn't included in the IRA, and there's still a lot to sort of keep in the ground. And so these two sort of organizing traditions that made the IRA possible in the first place are still around today. What do you think the Sierra Club sort of mission or strategy of organizing over the next 5 years is, and how do you see yourself executing that?
Well, I would say two things. One, and thanks for your question. In terms of how transformational this piece of legislation have been. When we were meeting with President Biden to celebrate, the Inflation Reduction Act. And of course, there are a lot of, I don't want to sound, it was transformational. It was amazing. There's a lot, of course, of poisonous pills there. Mm-hmm. And there were a few environmental organizations, a few environmental justice leaders as well in that meeting. And, of course, one of them brought up all those poisonous pills. And he answered, he acknowledged that and knew how it included sacrifice zones, when it comes to, especially in the Gulf. But what President Biden said was, I know there's a lot of bad things in it, but I think my contribution is that it definitely levels up the playing field. And we no longer, after this, it's not so much whether climate change exists or no, which is ridiculous in this country, that some people still have that in their minds, but it's more what we're going to do it, how to increase this pile of funding, and how the new economy and clean economy will go forward. And so that's really changing, because now it's no longer, whether we put money into it, is, what are we going to do with the money that we have? How is this going to affect local people? And so right now, to answer your question on the part of what Sierra Club and many other organizations are doing is getting all those $370 billion and how we're going to spend it at the local level. And so I think what we're seeing is a great example of how government should be. That is, the federal government is putting all these funding out there, but it's going to really take the states and local governments, the private sector, especially in manufacturing, and consumers to really be able to spend it. And so that's the way that we should be thinking on how the government should work best, that it's ultimately getting that funding out of the door through the local governments, and not only local governments, but again, there's a lot of incentives and also for consumers. So what we're trying to do now is through our infrastructure of chapters and local groups to be able to go there. And we're starting more with the blue states, that it's a little easier. But certainly a lot of the incentives are actually targeting red states, not because of a political decision, but more because that's a lot of what the needs and the needs for jobs, etc. The Southwest is really deprived for many years and decades of the investment. And so yeah, it's working with that. We're thinking, I think it's ultimately we have to devise strategies for each state, because each one is different, and to identify opportunities where the most proactive mayors are, to start working with them, and hopefully that would be an example and a model to follow.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll have to move to a reception, but you may be able to grab our guest there. Ramón Cruz, President of the Sierra Club, SAS alum. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, the Ignatius family invites us to a reception just outside the room here, if you can stick around.